right, good afternoon, everybody. I apologize for running a little bit late. Welcome to this workshop for the Temple City Council on May 6th, 2021. Currently, it is 2:30. Do we have anyone that signed up to speak today?
It's Mr. William Morris.
Mr. Morris, if you would please step to the podium. State your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Mayor, if I could just interrupt Mr. Morris, and he speaks for many people west of the intersection on Cotton.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Susan.
Needs to call you.
My name is Bill Morris. Live on Cottonwood, been there 35 years. I'm also your retired postmaster in Temple. Some of you know me, most of you don't. I was there from 1986 to 2003. I recognize one or two of you, and I appreciate everything that you've done as a city council. I'll tell you that. I got a short statement here, and I know that it's going to be short. Each one of you hopefully received a 3-page letter concerning the Cottonwood Lane. And I made sure that each one of you got one. Also, the consultant report, which was made 16 years ago, I provided that to you. Another gentleman who can't make it, he's in Mississippi today. And Don McRae, some of you probably know him, he's on the opposite end of the street. He's right there close to where Midway turns around to go to Thornton. This problem began when 363 loop access was actually changed from a 2-way to a 1-way. I don't know how many of you can remember that, but that's what happened. Traffic wanted to go in from west to go west from 31st Street to go over towards I-35. And instead of a 2-way on the access road, they would take 363 on that access road to get there. It's kind of hard to describe unless you live in that area. But the problem is that, yes, like Montgomery, Alabama, I remember that place, it was 2-lane 40 years ago. It worked fine. And it worked fine here for years. And when 363 came in and made that 1-way, and how do you get from 31st Street back over toward I-35? Well, they started using Cottonwood when they put the little small asphalt around, and it became a street just south of the hospital, which was King Stars Hospital at that time, and that's the Children's Hospital. So that's what's going on. And it is a very serious thing for about 20 of us that live on Cottonwood. I live in the house that used to be Ray Bennett's. He was athletic director here years ago. And I've been there 35 years, and it's a great place. It's quiet. But when this particular thing happened on 363, it changed. And that changed to where there was as many as 4,000 a day at peak. A day going up and down our street. I've seen everything. I can stand here for 2 days and tell you all kinds of stuff that's happened on Cottonwood Lane. And it's just not good. If you look in the report one of these days, you'll see where 75 miles an hour was recorded in those studies that they made. So the residents of Cottonwood Lane is asking the council to leave the rock at Oakdale and Cottonwood Lane as is. It's worked well for 16 years. We're asking, please, for the safety of the children and for the safety of the older people who like to walk in that street. It's like any other residential. Leave it as a residential street. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. All right, moving on to the work session. First item is to discuss the things needed in the regular meeting agenda items posted for tonight. Council, anything, or staff, any comments on anything posted? Everybody good? Staff good? All right. The next item is to receive a presentation regarding a proposed ordinance that will extend and amend the city ordinance number 2020-5071, which established a pilot program for extending outdoor dining and seating and mobile food unit operation within the city's central area zoning district. Ms. Rice.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna try to make this presentation as brief as possible. If this thing will forward. Which way should I press it? Oh, there we go. All right, so as y'all know, we established a pilot program for extended outdoor dining and seating. So for outdoor tables and chairs and city sidewalks and on-street city parking spaces, as well as coordination between restaurants and bars and mobile food unit operation in our downtown area back on November 19th, 2020. That is set to expire on May 19th, 2021. So the city manager, under the ordinance, has to determine whether or not to extend the program. She believes it's in the best interest of the city. She directed city staff to go ahead and extend this ordinance out by another 6 months. Well, this is a new ordinance, but extends the pilot program out another 6 months. And then she also directed staff to make any amendments that city staff thought would be necessary. So city staff went together and we implemented, we didn't implement it, but we put together amendments to make the program easier to implement and enforce, as well as for business owners to take advantage of the program. All right, so just real quickly, some of the changes from the current pilot program ordinance and this ordinance before you tonight is one of them is to remove the city manager's authority to terminate the ordinance without city council approval. Another one is to allow the city manager to extend the pilot program for an additional 30 days from the expiration date, which would be 6 months from May 20th, without city council approval. One of the other changes is to allow for easier city enforcement. So rather than have these different kinds of public health and safety concerns, the offenses where the state has to charge a culpable mental offense, to make it easier to enforce, the change that staff is suggesting is to make those strict liability offenses the maximum fine of $500 versus $2,000 unless some culpable mental state is alleged. So here are some changes to make it easier for businesses to take advantage of this program. One of them, as you recall, is when we originally conceived this program, we thought that we would have some mobile food unit operators that would be coming in from out of town that wouldn't necessarily have a city mobile food unit permit, but would want to take advantage of this program. So rather than making them go through the hoops of getting a city permit, you just put a permanent program underneath this program. But then we heard from a local business owner who said that that's onerous for his mobile food unit operators that he wanted to work with because they have a city mobile food unit operator permit through the city, and now they have to go get another permit. So we're going to reverse that and just change it. So if any mobile food unit operator wants to operate on this pilot program, they don't have to get a separate permit through this program. They only have to get their city mobile food unit permit through Chapter 14. Another one is that staff is recommending to change. Another requirement is that the city is recommending, or city staff is recommending, that mobile food unit, brick and mortar restaurant and bar operators, written agreements don't have to be submitted to the city with their permit application or their permit amendment. So currently, the way that it's written, the pilot program, if a mobile food unit operator wants to operate with a restaurant or bar operator, or vice versa, they have to put their written agreements together to the city and have the city approve those written agreements. And so to make it easier for businesses to substitute or alternate their mobile food unit operators that they're working with, the written agreements would still have to be in place, but they wouldn't have to be submitted to the city in any permit application or renewal. All they would have to be, all that would have to be done is that they'd have to show the written agreements to the city staff upon request, just to make sure that they are operating in conjunction with those restaurant and bar operators. So y'all recall, the reason for this program is so restaurant and bar operators could be helped during COVID with limited occupancy requirements. Those written agreements could be shown upon city request just on someone's cell phone. So, you know, city staff thought, well, this mobile food unit operator probably shouldn't be here. I've never seen them work with this restaurant or bar operator before, but they go to the restaurant operator and say, hey, is that food truck supposed to be here and working with them? He's supposed to yeah, send them an email. Here it is, just to make it easier for them to operate. And they don't have to wait on city approval. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to go to the next slide. Oh, I think I'm gonna need your help. That's okay. All right, thank you. So Another way to make it easier for businesses to take advantage of this program is currently in our pilot program ordinance, people can only use those permanent areas, the sidewalk areas or city on-street parking spaces during and mobile food unit operation between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. So it's recommended by city staff to change that so those areas could be used and those food trucks could be operating in conjunction with those restaurants and bar operators at all times that restaurant or bar is open for business. Another change, and this was recommended by a local business owner, was to remove the workers' compensation insurance requirement. Currently, under the pilot program ordinance, there are 3 types of insurance you have to have if you're using a city on-street parking space or a sidewalk. That is general liability insurance, alcohol insurance, alcohol service insurance if you are serving alcohol, obviously, and then a workers' compensation insurance. After a consultation with Charlotte Thomas, or Deputy City Attorney, she says that that particular workers' compensation insurance isn't required to protect the city. And also it apparently is very cost prohibitive for some businesses. So staff's recommending to remove that requirement. All right, so this item went to P&Z on May 3rd, this past Monday, and they voted to recommend this ordinance by a vote of 7-0 to City Council. 2 of the members were not present. So here we are today. This went to P&Z workshop on April 19th. April 23rd, I went to the Main Street Advisory Board meeting. They were pretty excited about this program. May 3rd is today. So here we are today. I'm sorry, May 3rd was P&Z, May 6th is today. And then this is set for second reading on May 20th. And I'm open to any questions and discussion that y'all have.
Would you say that it's been a success so far? I was downtown the other night. I think Fire Street had blocked off in front of them. And I mean, has there been any problems? Has there been any disagreements among vendors, or as far as the city knows, everything's going pretty smooth?
Well, actually, we have not had any applications on this program. I think you're probably talking
Oh, it's
about
different?
Friday events.
Okay.
Yeah, I think some of the, I know there's at least one business owner that is interested in taking advantage of this program, but he was stymied by some of the requirements. But I also think that maybe, well, also this program passed in November. So I think there may have been, just because of the weather, people may not have wanted to take advantage of this program. But also, I don't think that local business owners are really aware that they could extend their outdoor dining and seating onto sidewalks and to on-street parking spaces under this program. Because when I went to the Main Street Advisory Board, several business owners are really excited, and they said they didn't know that they were allowed to do that under this program. So they were pretty excited about it because they just didn't realize that that was one of the features of this program. But that's pretty much it. We haven't actually issued a permit underneath this ordinance.
Jocelyn, you have questions that may be relevant to the topic instead of mine? Sorry about that.
Well, we know that the food truck folks were unhappy. I'm assuming that you ran this by some of them and they agreed.
We talked to, the only feedback we've gotten was from a local business owner who works in coordination with food trucks. And he says the food truck owners that he was talking to already had their city mobile food unit permits. And so they didn't understand why I had to get another permit in this program. So that's one of the reasons that we removed that requirement in these amendments.
But
This
all the
is
food truck
separate.
owners that were here, I guess in the fall,
I know, that's what I was thinking
have they
too. You're
heard,
saying
did they
this is
know
different.
that this is happening?
Yes,
That they were so unhappy?
so this is separate. So just recall that we're planning on bringing back recommendations at your next workshop for changes to the overall chapter 14 mobile food unit regulations that we've workshopped extensively with our food truck community. And one of the areas of feedback within those conversations is that they would like to see this program made permanent. Staff's not quite ready to recommend that to you for multiple reasons, including one, we actually haven't had anybody participate in it, but we do see the value in continuing the program so we can continue to evaluate it. And so we anticipate that at the end of this 6-month period, we would be bringing back recommendations to either make certain parts of the program permanent or all of it, but it will give us an additional chance. So I think what you all are remembering is primarily related to the chapter 14 amendments, which is scheduled for your next work session. And yes, we have done extensive work with the food truck community. I think we've reached a good solution.
Also, Mayor, regarding the timing, in order to get the second reading in front of the council before the pilot program expired, we did have to condense this workshop presentation with your first reading tonight. So it is on the agenda for the first reading. I didn't know if you want Amanda to make this presentation again for the regular meeting, or is this presentation sufficient?
I think this one's sufficient, especially if we haven't had a permit issued yet, then it's not gonna be sort of controversial. So I think this is fine.
Okay,
Is that it, Ms. Rice?
that's it, unless y'all have any other questions or discussion.
I think so.
All right, well, thank you
Thank
guys.
you, ma'am. Moving on to item number 3 is to discuss traffic patterns on Cottonwood Lane in and around its intersection with Oakdale Drive. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you may recall, it's been some time since we talked about this topic last, but in March of 2020, rewind a little over a year ago and think about that, we discussed at a work session in March of 2020, the Cottonwood Oakdale intersection, and you'll recall 2002, as Mr. Morris pointed out earlier, 2002, TxDOT made changes to the access road on Loop 363 that limited two-way traffic to one-way traffic on those frontage roads. Those vehicles that were using frontage roads then kind of started scrambling, looking for ways to get back to I-35 without going through the 31st Street 363 signals at that time, because you'll probably also recall that at that time there were no U-turns located at that intersection as well. So anyone that wanted to get back towards I-35 had to sit through 2 lights on 31st if they went along the frontage road there. A couple years worth of that, and in 2004, the city engaged a consultant to do a traffic study in the area. Following that traffic study, City Council directed that Cottonwood Lane should be closed just west of its intersection with Oakdale Drive. And what you see then is this picture is on Oakdale looking west down Cottonwood. So you have the landscape island, as we'll go to call it on the rest of this presentation. A little additional background. During that March 2020 meeting, you'll recall we were just at the beginning of what we've come to lovingly call the pandemic at that time. So traffic patterns were not normal. Schools were shut down, churches weren't going to church. So council had directed us to do 2 things basically at that point. One was to perform a traffic count in the area so we can get kind of an update on those numbers from the 2004 study. And then the second was to conduct a survey to receive public input on this matter. So as school started back this past fall, late fall of 2020, we had a traffic study conducted, and then we conducted a survey in April of 2021. Just a little reminder here as well, looking at the area, you'll note that Cottonwood here is what we call a neighborhood collector. So it's classified as a neighborhood collector on our thoroughfare plan, as well as you have Meadow Oaks here. The green lines here, you have Oakdale down to Thornton is an arterial roadway. And then Thornton, as it continues around and into Midway, is also an arterial roadway. So we'll talk a little bit more about some thoroughfare planning as we move along. But just wanted to put this up there so that you're aware of what roadway classifications that you have currently in this area. So this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about traffic study. So one thing that was a little bit of a surprise initially to me was an overall reduction in traffic on Cottonwood Lane when you compare it back to the 2004 survey. So I say it was surprising initially because generally we think of traffic not getting better over time, but it generally gets heavier. In this case, though, as you think about it, like I mentioned before, you had initially when the traffic study was done, you had no U-turn at 31st in the loop. So anybody that was on that access road needed to go back to the west had to either sit through a couple of lights and be frustrated, or they tried to cut through the neighborhood, which is what you saw there. And as Mr. Morris pointed out earlier, in the 2004 study, what we saw, he gave the number of 4,000. So 4,000 is an accurate number if you talk about eastbound traffic and westbound traffic. The numbers that you see here are strictly westbound traffic on Cottonwood. So we focused on that because we focused less on what's happening as it moves back towards 31st Street. And we're focusing on what would happen if you were to remove that landscape island and allow traffic to move down Cottonwood. The likelihood is that you're going to see on our peak day, which was a Thursday, we hit 424 trips per day. So what we did, we put counters out at all entrances onto Cottonwood, as well as some counters along Cottonwood. When we looked at the total westbound in 2004, you had 1,250 westbound vehicles at that point. When you look at the total westbound on in our 2021 study, what you're seeing is just under 500 on our peak day. So that's a significant decline in the total number of vehicles that travel on Cottonwood.
David, you're saying that at least partially is because the rock barriers are there.
I think that it's more attributed to the fact that you can now go to 31st Street. If you're on the frontage road, going east on the frontage road, right up here, instead of having to wait at a light, go across the bridge, wait at a light, turn left and come back to 35, you can now go through a U-turn only bridge. So you pull here and you can do an automatic U-turn. So the traffic flow is less restricted today on the frontage road than it was at that time because that U-turn now exists. So I think that's the largest driver of the reduction in traffic that you'll see here, but not the only driver by any means. And it could possibly as well be that you see a reduction that, you know, people found it more tedious to drive through the neighborhood than it is to just stick to the service road and do the U-turn. So if it's more tedious to drive through the neighborhood, they're more likely to stick to the service road itself.
Because of the rocks or just because it's tedious to drive through a neighborhood?
That would be just, I'd be speculating if I said either way there, but there's, you know, overall you see more resistance through the neighborhood, so you go other ways.
Aren't there speed humps?
There are some speed humps on the west side.
When were those installed?
They were installed at the same time as the intersection block off.
As the rocks were.
Yes, ma'am. Said roughly same time. You know, I don't know if one came immediately before or immediately after. I wasn't here at the time, but I do know that it was roughly the same time. They came out of the same study.
So David, what's the, I remember when they did this, I had a friend that lived on Cottonwood, and he worked at King's Daughters. It irritated him so much that you don't have to start going around. So I heard a lot of complaining, but from one person. So what is the impetus now that the neighborhood's used to it? What's driving the change?
I forget exactly what brought the topic up, but we had a request to have the discussion initially. I don't know if it was through citizens asking council members, or if it was a council member request that came through Brand. But we had some requests, so we looked at it, and then our thought at that time was it was a council action to place those there. So if anything were to change, it would require council action to make a change.
And we do somewhat regularly get communication from residents who ask for it to be removed or why it's there. And it was a council request for us to have the conversation. So that's what initiated the last year's kicking this off.
So with Thornton, the new school, having been rebuilt, I think the next year, wasn't that 19 when they opened it, and then COVID was 20, so you can't really,
It might have been.
I'm sure the population increased. So I think the traffic would increase there as well, but it's probably hard to follow that with the pandemic.
Yeah, we did specifically count trips in and out on Thornton, on that. What you see there is coming in and out of the Thornton driveway. There,
Thornton School
Thornton
driveway.
School driveway, correct.
Just for clarification's sake, even I live right in the area and I get confused when listening to you talk, because I think we need to clarify Cottonwood West and Cottonwood East, because
Right,
there's a vast
when we-
difference in desire on the two sides of the
Right.
rocks.
Right, when we talk about westbound traffic, what I'm talking about, Cottonwood westbound traffic means that what we're measuring is traffic that is moving in this direction. We're not measuring anything that's moving back this direction with this study. We did measure it, but it's not in these particular results that you see. When you look at the total two-way traffic, both directions, it was just under 1,300 trips per day. So you take 1,300, you subtract out, say the 424, it leaves you with just under 1,000 trips that are traveling from the neighborhood area back towards 31st Street.
And the reason that we're focusing on westbound is the concern is traffic coming from the loop into the neighborhood, not the neighborhood to the loop, if that makes sense.
It does, but I know that neighbors, residents of West Cottonwood have concern about traffic coming up Midway and turning onto, if the rocks were removed, coming up Midway, turning onto Cottonwood and shooting through as if they're going to 31st or King's Daughters or the dance school or wherever. So the concern of the residents in West Cottonwood is just as strong coming having traffic come east headed to Midway or coming from Midway heading east.
So if you're thinking in that manner, then what I would say is, from 31st headed towards Midway, we would see, at worst, I would expect 500 trips per day. Okay, and then coming from Midway back to towards 31st Street, then you have an additional 800 to 900 trips that could be coming off Midway at that point that are
So
currently.
let's take 1,500 trips a day if the rocks were removed, shooting through the residential part of Cottonwood.
It would be just under 1,300, or,
Sorry.
yeah, just under 1,300 if you take both directions. But one of the things that we'll talk about here in a little bit when we start talking about alternatives for our path forward is as you look at your thoroughfare plan. So right now we have Cottonwood all the way to Thornton Midway area as a collector, and you have, this is Meadow Oaks Drive as your north-south. So we want to look at this section of Cottonwood as well as potentially this section of Oakdale. As you look from Oakdale back to the west, there are 17 driveways along Cottonwood, plus or minus. That's my count from an aerial map, so I could be off a driveway or two there. And then there are 8 driveways on Oakdale here, and then you have only one driveway on Meadow Oaks that dumps out from Cottonwood north to Thornton. It's also important to note that there is a traffic signal here at Oakdale and Thornton. So that does provide you some access, ease of access, making a left-hand turn if you are trying to get back to I-35. Some people may not like to sit at a traffic signal occasionally, but it does give you a signalized intersection to help kind of control that area versus if you were to continue west here and go up, there's no signal here. Continuing west here, there's also no signal at that intersection.
How many stop signs?
Right now, you've got the stop here. I believe there's a stop at this intersection, and then you'll have stop at the Thornton Midway area. And we'll talk again about this as one of our alternatives as we get down to that last piece. So when we talk about our public survey, what we asked, first question was, how often do you travel along Cottonwood Lane? And you can see that those that responded were largely in the frequent daily area. We asked what your reason for traveling through the area was, and this was one where you could check anything that applied to you. So you can see largely the respondents live in the area. And then most have at least some piece of either working, traveling through to the second bullet is to access I-35. And then traveling to and from school or church is your bullet here. And then other, what we had was kind of a mix of folks that were reiterating, I do live in the area. We had references to specific businesses that people were talking about. You know, I like to go, I use this when I go to the children's hospital, or I use this when I go to the mall, or whatever the case may be there. And then visiting friends and family, or just avoiding traffic in general. Those were the general responses. And I probably should have pointed this out from the get-go, but you do have binders at your place when you came in. Those binders have the full survey results along with all comments that anyone made. So if you're feeling bored, there's about 17 pages there that you can read through and see every comment that was made throughout this study. What I've tried to do here is generally summarize the comments that were made on those where we had additional comments. Next, we asked, there we go. Are you familiar with the landscaping island at Cottonwood and Oakdale? And the key for this question was that if you answered no here, then basically sent you to the end of the survey and said, please provide any additional thoughts you may have. If you did answer yes, I think there was only 7 or 8 no's that we had total. So, but if you did answer yes, then it moved you on to the rest of the questions. And you'll note now we start to see answered and skipped at the top of this. So some people just chose not to answer questions and they skipped them, along with those other 7 or 8 that did get pushed all the way to the end. We asked, do you feel that this landscaping island provides a benefit to the area? You can see we're just under 30% at no, and just over 70, or just under 30% at yes, just over 70 said no. Removing the island of Cottonwood and Oakdale would, and we ask again, check all that apply in your opinion. We had improved accessibility, cause of concern, for safety, would have no effect, or other. And again, when we had the other, please specify here, what we saw is that generally the largest amount of those others were reiterations of concerns for safety. So you had 17 responses that were directed towards safety. You had some concern, or some folks that expressed that they really feel it would improve their accessibility through the area, so they wanted to be able to move through that direction. That was your second piece there. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing my slides here. Statements regarding approved aesthetics. So there were some people that just didn't like the way it looked there. And then finally, statements regarding decreased access. So there were a couple of folks that thought that if you remove that barrier, that it was going to cause more problems and it was going to decrease accessibility because they would no longer be able to walk to certain places that they could walk to before, primarily. We asked if you would prefer to see that island removed. We had a small facet here that said they didn't care. Largely, we got yeses, and then no at about 25% there as well. And again, you do have detailed numbers and whatnot in your packet of the survey results. There's also several, we had basically provide us with any other statements you want to make at the end of that. So there are several statements that go through there. Again, we see largely what we saw in some of the other responses, which were folks that reiterated they had concerns for safety, or some that reiterated that they really, really, really wanted this area to be opened back up. So I'll let you read through those comments at your leisure. As we start to think about alternatives, and I want you to keep in mind, we're not asking you to make a decision today. What we would like to do is bring something back at a future council meeting where you can provide direction to staff on this topic. But to kind of address this, button it up, and tie a nice neat bow on it, what I would say is you have basically three choices to deal with here. One would be to reopen, remove, and these are in no particular order. There's no staff preference on these. It's strictly just stating your three alternatives. One would be to reopen the area and allow traffic to move about as it previously did, leaving your speed humps in place, leaving some of those other traffic control matters in place. Second would be to leave the area as is. And if we're going to do that, what we would recommend is that you consider revising your thoroughfare plan. And you'll recall, we talked about those two areas earlier. I'll scroll back to that slide here in a second. You can leave it as is and revise that thoroughfare plan. Or you could also relocate that closure one block over, basically, to Meadow Oaks, which is currently a collector, and revise the thoroughfare plan accordingly there. Again, those last two options will
If you
remind
moved
you.
it to Meadow Oaks, I'm sorry, could you go back, what,
Right, if we moved it to Meadow Oaks, we're talking about moving from this intersection to this intersection. So here you have
oh, you mean still Cottonwood, but at Cottonwood at Meadow Oaks?
still Cottonwood and Meadow Oaks,
Okay.
yes. So that's your other, since we already have Meadow Oaks as a collector street, you have Cottonwood as a collector street. It makes some sense here. I do have some hesitation with that, given that you do have a signalized intersection here. And it probably makes good sense to push folks to that intersection if you're going to leave it closed. So of those two, I bounce back and forth, but I would probably lean more towards Oakdale personally. So with that, what I'd like to do is just kind of open it up. I'll answer questions you have, any discussion you have on it, and if you have any direction, if you're seeing one of these alternatives that really piques your interest and you want to hear more about it for us to bring back, then we can do that. If you'd rather see it as an item where you bring it back and we can have the discussion at the council meeting, make a decision at the council meeting, we can do that.
I'm just wondering, are there other streets in our city that has issues like this? And if so, what is their traffic pattern and numbers?
I'm not aware of any that are closed in this manner. I know that we do have some that are near particularly railroad intersections where we closed roadways and it has kind of an on break like that. But beyond that, Don or Richard, are y'all aware of any other roadways that have the same?
Definitely none that are so frequently traveled that people go by. So
Well, and one point there, just to perhaps elaborate on what Judy's saying, I don't mean to say this is what your question is, but I'll add to her question, is a distinction between a street that might have an issue of some kind related to traffic and a closure of some nature being a business street versus a residential street. Do we have any other residential streets in the city that have faced what Cottonwood West faced when the traffic patterns changed on the loop?
I'm certain that there are streets that exist that have equivalent traffic volume to what they got in that scenario, but I can't off the top of my head
Well,
give you specific
of course
examples.
not.
But I know that we do have neighborhoods that have upwards of 2,000 plus trips per day traveling through those neighborhoods. And just to give you a kind of a comparison, when you talk about trips per day and we talk about traffic engineering, they tell you to estimate each single family home generates about 10 trips per day in and around that neighborhood. So 2,000 trips per day is the equivalent of a 200 lot subdivision. And having a single point in and out, 200 lot subdivision, you're going to see about 2,000 trips per day. So that kind of gives you a little bit of something to compare to. A large service station that has 8 to 12 pumps is going to get close to that 2,000 trips per day mark. So a hard corner service station could get close to that 2,000 trips per day. That just kind of gives you some comparison of what that looks like.
Did I understand you correctly that you were recommending, maybe that third recommendation, to move that island west?
I'm saying that would be something that you could consider, because you do have a collector street here already. And we've got a collector here. So as it is currently, you've got a collector that dumps onto what's currently classified as a local residential street, but it's functioning as a collector because you're dumping a collector into it. So my recommendation is either you do away with this section as a collector and you reclassify this as a collector, or you bump your closure back to this intersection and then do away with this piece as a collector.
Said in another way, the thoroughfare plan doesn't match because of the closure. It's showing Cottonwood and Meadowbrook as collectors, but they don't really, the west end of Cottonwood and Meadowbrook aren't able to function as collectors because you've got it blocked off. So really, staff is just presenting kind of basically two alternatives. Remove the closure, and then that way it will function as a collector, and then leave the thoroughfare plan alone. But if you decide you want to keep Cottonwood closed, our recommendation is that you have the thoroughfare plan reflect correctly that section isn't really a collector, and switch it back to a local road. If you leave the closure in place exactly where it is, Meadowbrook needs to be changed to a local road, and Oakdale needs to be the collector, because that's the one that's serving as a collector. If you wanted to leave Meadowbrook as the collector.
Meadow Oak, just.
Meadow Oak, I'm sorry,
No, no,
Meadow
that's
Oak as the collector, then our recommendation would be to move the island so so Meadow Oak could function as the collector. But the consideration, I think that David also was pointing out, is that Oakdale, okay, I'm checking with you, and Thornton
Oakdale
has the signalized intersection. So it may, even though Oakdale isn't shown on the thoroughfare plan as a collector, it may make more sense for that one to be the collector, really outside of what you do with Cottonwood because of the signalized intersection. So I hope that without with forgive me for the street names, if that makes sense.
And I'm sure you're all aware of this, but Oakdale does turn into 57th Street as you cross the loop. So that signal
It really is a collector.
at the loop, it's an arterial roadway, so a major traffic thoroughfare as you move to the north there. And what we're really talking about is this section here.
In terms of your numbers of respondents and their thoughts, I just want to be clear that there are many, many, many commuters who use these roads who don't have no idea that there was a survey. And my guess, and again, it is based on nothing other than my guess, is that most of them would say, remove it because it makes my access better. I don't care whether it's good, bad, or indifferent for residents. Make my access better. Again, that's just my gut feeling. Because there are many, 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 many people who use this general area that don't live within the area at all. And I think that's really, really important to understand that the bulk of the respondents to the survey live right within the area. Many of them have, on the east side of the rocks, have told me on the phone in extensive conversations over the past year that what they really don't like is looking at the rocks. The rocks are ugly. The access for them is not an issue. It's the, what they see is ugly.
And we saw that same reflection in a lot of the comments that we had in the survey, was that there were a lot of folks that just didn't like the way it looked.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look good.
Anybody reach out to TISD and ask them about this, because that would obviously change what goes on at their school. I think it would probably increase traffic with people cutting through.
At the, passing by the school.
Right.
Right.
That's a thought.
I used it frequently when it was open, just to get from 31st to I-35. I mean, I was one of those people. And I know.
Example.
And, but, so I had the occasion to drive that exact route a couple of times this weekend, and that barrier does exactly what it's supposed to do. It forced me back over to Thornton, and then, on to I-35. And I know that when you're on the west side, all right, you're on the west side of the barrier, that street necks down some, and it really is a pretty tight neighborhood street, because there's a lot of cars, fairly small driveways, I think. I think probably most of those homes are probably 3 automobile households. And so there's lots of cars on either side of the street. And it's to me, it's about 1.5 lanes wide. And I think if you open it back up, you're gonna get a lot more traffic shooting through there, trying to come both ways. So.
Another thing that's probably important for you to understand too is that although the roadway is classified as a neighborhood collector, it's not structurally any different than the other roadways in the neighborhood. They're all 31 feet back-to-back streets. So realistically, the designation was more just to know for planning purposes where you want to channel most of your traffic. And if that doesn't line up with what we have here, then it makes sense to change the plan rather than force anything one way or another. So just some additional thought there. Your roadway here is also 31 feet back-to-back, 31 feet back-to-back on all of these roadways.
Oakdale is too,
Oakdale is too.
even if you then reclassified Oakdale as a
It
collector.
would be the same.
Same thing.
Yes, ma'am. Same street section for Oakdale and Cottonwood, Meadow Oaks, all of those in the area. I know that my personal preference, I use this occasionally to get back to I-35 as well. My personal preference is to come down to Pin Oak and over, just because I have a thing for right-hand turns. So I feel like I get to make more right-hand turns that way.
Did you take the survey?
No, ma'am.
There were several comments within the survey from people who live on Pin Oak that said basically when Cottonwood was closed, it increased traffic on Pin Oak. So it's kind of a trade-off there.
Yeah, I get calls.
From David, apparently.
Yeah.
I get calls from Pin Oak residents screeching about the traffic.
That signal's a lot more efficient to get through also.
The Pin Oak,
Yes.
oh,
So Mr. Morris, just out of curiosity, Mr. McCray, what were his thoughts?
He's right with me. Yeah.
oh, he's extremely opposed to open.
I spent a
Mr.
lot of my
McCray's-
high school at his house with his
Yeah.
daughter. And drove
Yeah.
down Cottonwood a lot, so,
He's out of town.
What he was
so-
saying was that the driveway that he has is right there real close to Midway. And so those people that are moving from east to west, then they were always lined up 4 or 5 cars. And then he couldn't even get out of his driveway. In other words, that was what he was stressing with me. So, yes. And that report that you guys got, he's the one that actually kept it those years. And then I made a copy from that. when He went to Mississippi. So, yeah, I hope that answers.
David, one thing too, for the people living in Canyon Creek, that East Drive, Forest, and Oakdale is an old time cut through, so, you know, I would support that vision. I use it to get to the loop, I use it even to get across the 57th.
Did you take the survey?
We are just revealing all sorts of secrets today.
These are these commuters that I was referring to.
And overall, does it help to move? Would it help traffic flow? Let me back up. It seems to me that you either leave the barrier there or you move it one street over. That costs something, right?
Mhm.
So do you get an improved traffic flow by moving it one intersection to the west? Because it seems like you could do that. If it improves traffic flow, you maintain the safety of the neighborhood area, and hopefully you don't dump a bunch of extra traffic near the school. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
But how's it gonna increase the flow of traffic?
That's my question. Is
I think,
there a benefit to moving it one intersection and still allow for maintaining the safety of the neighborhood, which is the issue that Mr. Morris has, and maintaining lower traffic flow, which in my mind maintains the safety around the school?
And residents.
Because you still have people that are cutting through the, used to be the Hobby Lot where Harbor Freight is,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Cutting through there at
The
least.
Big Lots Center.
Yeah, I mean, so people are gonna do what they're gonna do to make it most convenient. My thought is leave it where it is unless it improves traffic flow by moving it one intersection.
I think any measure of improved traffic flow could likely be offset by moving it away from the signal. So I would hesitate to move the bulk of your traffic away from the
Okay,
traffic.
yep, that makes sense.
If you did that, people trying to, right now, people coming out, down 57th and turning left on Thornton, and people coming, going east on Thornton and turning left onto 57, and the gas station there, all clump up at rush hour. And sometimes people can't turn out of Oakdale because the traffic is backed up past the intersection in Oakdale. They have to wait till the traffic moves with the
Right.
light signal.
I think what you would likely see if you were to move it would be an increase in traffic here as any backups happen. That signal. But again, I don't know, you know, given the volume that we're talking about, I really don't know that that's worth picking up everything and moving it one block.
And getting a whole bunch of other people excited because now they're looking at it. Is there any way to beautify it in some way? I mean, it's not, there's no water line, so putting a tree
Right.
would be an issue.
Right.
$20,000 for sprinkler system on.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
it's, yeah, the initial install and then the maintenance becomes an issue. You know, if
Yeah.
there was somebody that just absolutely wanted to volunteer to make it beautiful, it became a community project and that's.
District 3 rep, go dump a bucket of water.
I'm not dragging water up there. Sorry to say.
Maybe
So
we
we
can go
could
back
ask-
to the option slide, see if we can get a little bit of direction on what kind of resolution we want to bring back at a future meeting.
Marty, did you have something you wanted to say? Did you have some, we've asked everybody else, so.
Well, I would just comment, I was kind of sort of part of this. My predecessor was Martha Tyrock, and when all this occurred. And just to support what Mr. Morris said, you cannot believe how much construction was going on the access roads, both directions, on Loop 363. It was just massive, as well as the bridge. And so when people left work at Scott and White, trying to go to Belton, Georgetown, wherever, Troy, they couldn't go on the access roads because it was all under construction. And so they were finding all these different ways. And so the popular thing was to go behind, as you know, go behind King's Daughters and then down Cottonwood. Traffic was just immense and going down through there, just what the study has said. So that's when it was decided to put the rock there. About 2008 or so, and when I was on the council, we had an informal discussion at a workshop. It was nowhere near the level of this. But it was response, as I recall, constituent comments. And the council at that time decided we're gonna leave it alone. And that was about 2008, but we didn't have guys like David give us all that kind of information. It was just an informal discussion.
Thank you.
So generally speaking, I feel like I'm hearing that you would want to see option 2.
I think so.
I don't think option 1 is on the table. So it's either 2, which is the easiest, or it is to really dig in a little bit on option 3 and see if that really does or doesn't make a difference. And you've done a good job of that. I just like to understand it.
Do you think that,
Those are issues from 20 years ago. And a lot of things have changed in that time. We need to look at it as it is today and what it can be tomorrow. It's a shame it got built that way to begin with, but that was a long time ago and nobody's here. So it just, I do think that you're not gonna do 1, probably gonna do 2, but I'd really like to kind of consider 3.
David, but your thought is probably with option 3, that would stack traffic up at Meadow Oaks and Thornton, which would then either back it up
Right.
and then have to wait for the light change, or put a light there too, possibly, and that would be 2 lights very close together.
I think before I would be comfortable with just giving an absolute opinion on that, I would prefer to go watch it at 5 o'clock, kind of see what it looks like personally. And I think it would be easy enough to have a quick decision at that point, but I can't say that I've sat at that intersection at 5 o'clock and seen what traffic looks like. So, like Mr. Williams said, I think I would prefer to dig a little bit there before I opined on that too much.
Authorize the overtime for you to go sit.
Well, I frankly see absolutely nothing to gain other than spending money by moving the rocks to Meadow Oaks. I think 1 is out of the question, obvious, from my perspective and from the perspective of many residents. I will be very, very unpopular because I have more residents calling me to take the rocks out than I have residents calling me to keep them in. But I think safety is far more important than beautification in a few people's opinion. So from my perspective, I think, why spend money? Leave it at 2. It's working, keeping safety as a primary issue.
So Susan, do you, whenever you say the rocks, you mean the 3 big chunky?
Those,
What if those were just removed? I mean, you leave the island there,
oh,
right? And nobody runs over. I mean, because there's an island, there's a big curve, and then the rocks are set inside of that.
I
There's a
think the
yellow sign behind it with arrows going both ways.
I think the rocks are
There you go.
partly there because it makes it harder to drive across the curves. I mean, there was a wreck, somebody tried to drive through the rocks, I believe last fall.
So what
But they only tried it once.
what you could do is,
Drunk, but it was morning rush hour.
yeah, it would be possible. You could infill this with concrete and then put what we call inter-road markers there. So it's basically, it would be three poles with diamond pendant on it and then have crossboards on it.
Make it look better.
So I don't know if that makes it look better really, or if that just makes it look worse, but
Look worse.
I think that would be your only other alternative there.
Susan, what's the mascot for Thornton Elementary?
What's
Pop
good?
quiz,
Say
the
what?
mascot for Thornton Elementary.
Uh,
Perfect.
What is it?
Roadrunner statue.
There
I'm
you go.
serious.
Yeah, I like it, a great big road runner.
No,
Now, that's not a bad idea. To match the Wildcat statue in front of the high school. Maybe not quite so grand, but.
Roadrunner's smaller than
Shouldn't cost much.
a Wildcat.
Does that practice field have a name?
Say
So I
what?
see it used as parking for the practice fields.
The practice fields are used all the time.
People pull up and unload kids.
They play games.
Bags.
Yeah.
Staging area for that.
I saw some real thing, softball games.
All the time. Every time I go on the council, there kids playing there.
But you might put the, what's your name of the field or something?
Even church owns that.
I don't know whether the church owns the field, or I don't know that, but it's,
This conversation has moved from one.
Thornton.
side.
Now we're all Googling.
I know, I think it's Thornton Thunderbirds.
I still like to see it go sit at the.
I feel comfortable enough to,
I sat there at 5 o'clock many.
Can you whittle a
many
Thunderbird?
times.
That's next.
Can you whittle one?
While you're in traffic.
whittled chainsaw carving.
There you go.
I think you're gonna need a road runner with any of the options now.
I'm into, I've got a little Roadrunner metal art thing in my front yard. I really like Roadrunners, so.
I have a
I wanted
rubber
it to be a
statue about
Roadrunner really
this
bad.
tall.
All right, so you're looking for direction. Number one's out. Number two is probable, it sounds like, and you're gonna go watch traffic and check on number three and see.
If we move that, it looks like we're only gonna get 2 houses.
Yeah, it's really only 2 houses difference, and then both of these, you have one driveway here, and then the other house's driveway is on to Meadow Oaks.
Have
One
we,
driveway.
have we surveyed
Exactly.
the folks on that corner, the southwest corner?
I don't know,
They had
Whether
the
they
option to
actually-
respond.
I thought maybe
Yeah.
you had an opportunity.
I don't know whether I've talked specifically to them or not. I have to go back through all my paperwork.
Out of curiosity.
what we can do is prep an item that talks about leaving this in place, but when we discuss that, we'll also have the information and kind of a formal recommendation at that point.
Okay.
Here, there, everywhere.
Sounds like a plan.
David, you know I'm cheap until it comes to making a roadrunner statue. I just don't see the value in paying to move this 1 block for 1 driveway.
Understandable, and I,
On the other hand, I'd be willing to vote for a roadrunner statue.
Noted, thanks.
Take that out of your council. Okay, council, is there anything else? Give Mr. Olson. All right, thank you, sir.
Good job.
Thank you so much, David.
Conversation got a lot more loud when we started talking about road records or a Thunderbird, whatever. Okay, moving on to item number 4 is to receive an update on the city's strategic plan and discuss possible amendments.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Before I start, I did want to introduce 2 of my team members that are here with me today. We have Priya Gambrell, who is our new equity manager. She started April 12th. And I'm excited for you to get to meet Priya and to hear about her plans for our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Next to her is Christine Liao, who is our performance and analytics manager. And much of what I'm going to share with you today is really greatly due to Christine's talent, hard work, and dedication. She's amazing, and I'm really fortunate to have such talented team members. So let's talk strategic plan. So I want to take us back through a little history of where we started with our strategic plan to where we are now. So in September of 2019, council adopted our strategic plan. And our strategic plan had 4 focus areas and 9 goals. And shortly after the strategic plan was adopted, we began collaborating with departments to create very detailed task lists and timelines to operationalize and implement our strategic plan. So in September of 2020, we made a small tweak to our strategic plan in that we changed our infrastructure and utilities focus area, changed the name of it to Smart Growth. And we took one of our 9 goals and moved it from high performing organization focus area over into Smart Growth. And so for the last year, as we have been working with our strategic plan. Christina and I met frequently with departments to check in with them and see how it's going, how they're monitoring and tracking what's going with the strategic plan. And we heard some pretty consistent feedback that they were struggling with some of our initiatives. And I'll give you an example. So we have an initiative that essentially says, continue to invest in training and licensing and certification. And where departments were getting hung up was in that, with that word continue to, because it doesn't indicate that there's a start or an end to that, right? So when departments developed those implementation plans or those task lists, they developed that for FY20. And so they were very successful with that. And, you know, let's say that they completed 100% of the plan for FY20. Where we realized we had some issues is as we began to transition from FY20 to FY21. And so you have this same initiative where we were reporting it, or Christine and I would report that as 100% complete. But then there's a new plan for that because we're saying continue to do, right? And so what Christine and I realized at that point is that's going to skew our results. So in 2020, where we report something is 100% complete, in 2021, when we report in the first quarter, then you know, maybe we're only 10 or 20 or 25% done. So it skews our result.
And then, Stacy, if I can also kind of elaborate on that. For initiatives like that, you know, continue to invest in training. The way, just to refresh council on the way that we track our progress on the strategic plan, and Stacy mentioned this, we've asked each of our departments to build out detailed project implementation or initiative implementation plans. And we put those in a tracking tool we call, or it's called Smartsheet. We don't call it that. The name is Smartsheet. And that lets us understand what the steps are to implement that particular initiative and where we are on that, if we're on track, behind, you know, what, if there's barriers there. But some of the things that we were calling initiatives, we were really struggling to put together effective project plans because we were just finding that they didn't fit into that mold of you do this step and then this step and then this step and then you're done, because they were more about a continuation or an embodiment of almost a value that we had, you know, being transparent or collaborating with community members. It's not a do this, do that, and you're done kind of thing. So we were finding we were just really struggling with that. And so I'll let you pick up there.
And as, you know, speaking about those values and things that, you know, we want to continue to do, that's not something that, because it doesn't fit the mold, it's not something we want to do away with. We want to make sure that we continue to make those the important priorities for us. So in November of 2020, we started having some discussions about this and like, how can we make this better? How can we make this work better? So what that led us to is some discussions about the structure of our strategic plan. And so we have, this is our current structure. So we have goals, which are what we want to achieve. And then we have commitments, which are what we're going to do. And then we have strategic initiatives, which is how we're going to do that. And again, as Brent said, those are the things that we're tracking in Smartsheet. And as we began discussing this, you know, it was it was a little difficult to articulate like really what the problem was. And Christine created this video to help us all understand. And it was like this aha light bulb moment that really helped us to help to clarify and solidify what the issue really was. So I'm going to play a short excerpt from the video, and hopefully it'll do the same thing for you. It'll help you understand kind of what our thought process was.
So that brings us to our first recommendation for a change to this. Oh, thank you, Alan. There we go. Our first recommendation of change to the strategic plan, which is in that structure that I talked about. So having our goals and our commitments, but then below that, we have strategic initiatives, which, as Christine said in the video, are those things that will implement a new process. They have a very distinct start and end. And those are the kinds of things that we will track through project plans in Smartsheet. And then the other category would be those operational priorities, so those values that Bren was talking about. Those are the things that we already do that we're going to continue to prioritize and do. And those kinds of things will be tracking through our work plan and our performance management system, through goals that are cascaded down throughout the organization, and also through our key performance indicators. So the next change that I want to talk about is, when council had their strategic planning retreat, one of the big topics of conversation was around council's priority related to communication, right? Our communication with our citizens, the way that we tell our story, the way we tell people about the great things that are going on in the city, right? And so when we developed the strategic plan, we did include a number of strategic initiatives that support that priority, but we put them in the high-performing organization focus area. And as we have, over the last year and a half, worked through this strategic plan, it's kind of felt like maybe that's not exactly the right place for that, or they needed a more of a highlighted focus, right? And then as we began talking about our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, it felt like that kind of made the case for that a little bit stronger for us to actually add an additional focus area. So a fifth focus area that we're calling communication and collaboration. And, you know, the parts of the way that through our DEI initiative that we will communicate and collaborate with our citizens related to our DEI programming, those kind of have a natural fit in with this new focus area. We're also recommending adding a 10th goal, which is open and responsive communication with our community. So if you'll notice at the bottom, we have those categories. We now have initiatives and operational priorities, and we've added that fifth focus area. We're still going to have, like for specifically for the DEI initiative, we'll still have where we're looking at ourselves internally, our internal DEI initiatives will still lie in the high performing organization focus area, but where we're going to be communicating outward, that's all going to be in communication and collaboration. The council approves that change.
So really what we're proposing is kind of two big changes to the strategic plan. Again, one is adding an additional focus area that really clarifies and highlights that we have a strong focus on communication with our community and communication regarding the great things that are happening in Temple, as well as our change that we're recommending in how we, instead of having every implementation step be considered an initiative, we think some of those are more appropriately documented as operational priorities. Again, the ones that we seek to continue to do year after year. And we feel like those are better tracked and that accountability exists in our work plan process and through our key performance indicators instead of through a step-by-step project plan that works really well and keeps us on track and makes a lot of sense for the true initiatives, those things that seek to change something or implement something new and have definitive start and end things. But for those other things, we don't, in our multiple conversations together as staff, you know, I kept saying, I don't want to lose those things just because they're not initiatives. Maybe I don't want to lose them. I don't want the budget to drive the strategic plan. I want the strategic plan to drive the budget. And so I think, you know, what Christine really laid out very well and very clearly for me and was a light bulb moment for me is that you don't lose them. They're not initiatives, but you keep them as operational priorities and you hold yourself accountable for those things through our work plans, our annual work plans, and through our key performance indicators. So those are the two changes that we're recommending for your consideration is to, again, add a focus area and a goal and add a category of operational priorities and shift some of the things that we originally considered initiatives into the category of operational priorities.
Could you almost call operational priorities almost cultural priorities? I mean, do they kind of point toward the culture?
Not all of
I mean,
them.
I understand what you're getting at. I'm just,
Yeah, some of them do, but I mean, if you could think of, you know, investing in capital equipment, I wouldn't say is really a cultural thing. It's more of how you operate as an organization. So, and one of the things I think, Mayor, you stepped out when the video started, but one of the things that is kind of foundational here is it's not so much, it doesn't matter so much what you call them, that it's that you have an agreed definition. So what they are, you're consistent that if it's an initiative, or if you want to call that whatever you want to call it, it is something that you're seeking to make a change, and it has a definitive start and a definitive end and clear steps in the process. So you can call that an initiative or whatever else you want to call it. The name isn't as important as the characteristics that define it. And the same thing with operational priorities. We threw out a whole, you know, several different names. So it doesn't really matter what you call them. It's the idea that those are things that you seek to continue. They're how you do business, how you operate as an organization. And they have just as much impact on the success of of us achieving our vision and implementing our mission as do the initiatives. They're just different in that they aren't true initiatives that you start and finish. They're things that you live through continuously.
But Christine made a really good point, I guess, in the first screen. I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but what does this word mean?
Exactly.
Perfect place to start.
And by the way, she said she will never make me a video again because I have showed it to everyone. So,
I really, really like starting with the meaning of the word. That's everything. If you've got the wrong meaning, you're already in the first, at point A, you're on the wrong track.
and you look at different strategic plans, different, and they're all valid, but you can, some people, we have focused areas, people call those different things, people call goals different things, objectives, strategies. There's different words that people use. And again, it's more important that you've got the right characteristics there than what words you choose to use with it. And then that you're consistent and because it does help as we for example, we considered recommending to you that we change the term commitment. So those, Stacy, can you go to the slide that shows the hierarchy?
I'll get that.
Yeah, thank you. So that's the level just under the goals. And we considered recommending that we change that to strategies, because again, that's about what we're going to do. So what is the strategy for doing that? Ultimately, we decided that the consistency outweighed continuing to use the word commitment, because we have, since this time, we've adopted a comprehensive plan that uses this same hierarchy, and our neighborhood plans use this same hierarchy. So the benefit of changing the word didn't outweigh the benefit of keeping it consistent, and something we've been working with over the last 2 years. So, but again, I think kind of the message is it doesn't matter so much what you call it. It matters more that that you agree on what the definition is. You have a shared understanding of that.
I have one other thing, if there's no other discussion around that, and that's all I have for the recommended changes.
Stacey, while you're getting into, and I'm assuming you're moving into
No.
a performance report. Oh,
Yes, I am moving into, but it's in the same
okay.
presentation.
So Stacey's gonna set up for you our kind of performance report of what we've accomplished over the last year through our strategic plan. But before she goes into that, Council, do you have any concerns with us continuing to move in the direction of adding that focus area and beginning to track things through initiatives and priorities? Thank you.
Thank you. So for the last half of what I want to talk about is you all should have a copy of our performance report 2020. And I'm very excited to present this to you. So let me talk a little bit before we get into a summary of what you'll find in the report about how the report is structured. So the report is organized by focus area. There are department-specific pages that report on the key performance indicators. And I chose to pick on Allen today. This is what that essentially looks like. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is Christine worked a lot of hours and very diligently and collaborated with all departments to identify key performance indicators. And she did some great analysis and has included some really informative narrative that helps to explain not only what the measure is, but what the results of the measure for this year look like. So I think you'll get a lot of really good information out of reading the report. I'm going to hit some of the highlights. So the overall, when we talk about the overall strategic plan progress, I want to first say that doesn't mean just for plans for 2020. That's looking at the entire scope of the 6-year plan as it was first adopted, right? Remember, we had that 1+5, so it was a 6-year plan. So in FY20, we accomplished 38% of that 6-year plan. So there were 21 initiatives that were completed. There are 94 that were in progress. There were 18 that were not started, but those are slotted for future years. And so if you look at those 4 focus areas, high-performing organization was 40% complete. Places and spaces, focus area was 38% complete. And then you have public safety at 25% complete and smart growth at 37% complete. So looking at each focus area specifically, again, I said that focus area, high-performing organization was at 40%. There were 12 initiatives completed there, 51 were in progress, and 8 were not started. There are 4 goals there, and an organization committed to performance excellence was completed at 45%, and open and responsive and accountable governments at 57%, community leaders with a bold vision and intentional direction at 7%, talented and dedicated employees is at 28%. Some of the major accomplishments, so some of the things, those initiatives that I said were completed, these are some of the things that were completed in 2020. We developed.
Stacy, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt?
Yes.
You? Can you go back one slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I'll lose my train of thought, forget where to come.
Sure.
You go back. What does this mean that talented and dedicated employees have heart for service is only 28%? Because I don't know a single employee who isn't talented or dedicated.
So it means that of the initiatives that we aligned to that goal, 28% of those initiatives were completed, or the ones that were started in that year, they were completed in 28%.
Okay, we're talking about the goals,
We're
not
talking-
the employees.
Correct. This is our goals and the initiatives in the strategic plan that align to those goals.
I got it.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
And just to highlight again, this report is for fiscal year 2020. So that's the first year that we were implementing the strategic plan, which at that time was a 6-year plan. And so if you take 100% and divide it by 6 years, just generally speaking, that's around 16, 17%. So having, and it's not necessarily linear like that, but that something's only 28% complete is not alarming because we have 5 more years to finish everything that we set out to do.
Right, because we're going to complete it within less than 5 years and we need to start new things.
Well, we do, yes. So it is a living, breathing thing. So as we go through budget, we will recommend additional initiatives to you. And that is, so these numbers are evolving because it's not everything that we laid out in the first plan. If we accomplish that, we haven't arrived yet. We've got more work to do. So as we add additional years to the plan, you'll see additional initiatives come online as well or be recommended.
Like building road.
Exactly. Public art is already in there.
So some of the things that we accomplished in the high-performing organization focus area, developed a comprehensive and accurate personnel policy manual, implemented an online bidding system, implemented an open records software, developed a downtown parking action plan, implemented a solid waste management and route optimization system, conducted a general government compensation study, created a new city website, implemented a performance management system, which is essentially to track our strategic plan progress and our performance measures, and then implemented a hydraulic and hydrologic modeling system. So looking at the places and spaces focus area, that was at 38% complete. 6 initiatives were completed. There were 22 in progress and 4 not started. The 2 goals that are in that focus area, beautiful spaces and unique experiences, was at 40%, and then neighborhoods where people love to live was at 33%. Major accomplishments there, we acquired a new Parks and Recreation Administrative Facility, developed a Parks and Trails Master Plan, designed program services and collections based on the needs and interests of the community that's related to the library, and then created a neighborhood planning program that identified capital improvement programs and initiatives to meet residents' needs and maintain the city's high quality of life. In the public safety focus area, that's at 25% complete. We were able to complete one initiative there, 3 were in progress and 4 were not started. There's only 1 goal there, so it's also at 25%. The major accomplishment in that focus area was updating the outdoor warning siren system. And then finally, smart growth focus area was at 37% complete with 2 initiatives complete, 18 in progress and 2 not started. The first goal, a city that supports well-managed growth and development, it's 20%. And then infrastructure and systems that support exceptional service and community growth was at 45%. And major accomplishments there, the update of the strategic investment zone program, developed a comprehensive plan, the development of a downtown zoning ordinance to ensure design standards and land use regulations aligned with the master plan, implemented a program to improve response time to non-emergency water line breaks. And that is all I have as far as my summary of the performance report. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council?
I wouldn't know where to start.
Very professional.
Very good.
Yep, very good. I'll say this every time you do a presentation, I say this, but, no, that time that we spent as a group, putting all this together and, setting a heading, I love what your department does in keeping everyone on track and then always keeping it malleable, changing as we need to. It really gives us a sense of direction, and then, as always, everything needs to remain trackable. I think sometimes it's easy to lose that part, and that's what you guys are here for. So thank y'all for that. It really makes a difference, I think, in where we're going. So very good job. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. I did send copies of the application to the Mensa Society. Did you apply? Not yet.
Still trying to figure out what it is.
If you can make that video, you can figure that out.
Christine, I can tell you,
The truth, all the video was all done in one take,
That's right, I didn't edit anything.
right?
There was no dog barking in the background.
All right, very good. And then item number 5 is to discuss virtual participation options for city boards and commissions.
I do have a presentation, if you can pull it up. It's in the staff conference room.
Hmm?
Just did this. I got a headache with the
under
It's in the staff conference room drive under council work session, May 6th. Hopefully.
I'll put that in later.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so, council, I just need to get a little bit of feedback from you on direction for virtual participation options for our board and commission meetings as we're starting to transition to at least hybrid meetings, some in-person meetings. I just want to make sure that staff is still on track in implementing what you're wanting to see and make sure I have clear direction. So just a little bit of background and refresher on the topic. When we had our board and commission work session back in September of last year, we talked a little bit about virtual meetings or virtual participation options for our board and commission meetings. Some of the staff recommendations that we had for some of our boards were about continuing allowing virtual attendance. We were at that time exclusively in many cases, virtual because of the pandemic. But we did see some opportunities to increase access if we continue to have virtual attendance as an option. And then in our legislative agenda that you all adopted, we did support the continued use of technology and other tools to such as secure virtual public meetings to encourage the general public to participate and engage with state and local governments remotely. So I feel like I've gotten a little bit of feedback from you all based on those two conversations, but I just wanted some very clear understanding that staff was doing what you wanted to do in terms of as we transition back to at least some form of in-person meetings. Do you want to continue to offer virtual participation options in addition to in-person options as we go forward? Or is there a path where you want to move back to only in-person meetings? So a couple of options that I have for that we have for your just thoughts and consideration is you really, just as a reminder, you have two categories of boards. Some of your boards are quasi-judicial or more than advisory in nature, meaning they take final action on certain items or they make decisions that don't come back to you for final action. And then most of the boards are advisory boards. So what they do is make recommendations to you, but they don't have the ability to make any determination or take any action without also sending it to the city council for consideration. So we can, in my mind, we can do a few things. We can continue to have a virtual participation option for all boards and commissions. We can continue to have a virtual participation option for the boards that are quasi-judicial or more than advisory in nature. So that would be, again, things like P&Z, for example, or Building and Standards Commission, the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So these are boards that usually have some public hearings and can take action that you may want to have a broader level, broader access for people to continue to participate virtually. Or we can go all the way to in-person. There's no legal consideration for providing a virtual option, but it's really just a policy level decision if you want to continue to see some virtual options as we go forward. And it's really for both board and commissions and the city council meeting. We've learned how to do virtual meetings really well, and it provides another layer of access for public participation in boards and commissions. But I have had a request from at least one board that wants to go in person only. And I think we've probably had an advisory board meeting or two, kind of just in person only, really just because we don't have a clear policy on whether we're going to always have a virtual option or if there's cases where you're comfortable going back to just in person. So I just need a little bit of direction on what you guys wanted to see in terms of continued virtual use of the virtual platforms.
This is the board that wanted to say all.
The reinvestment zone. And Jana, what was the board recently? Historic Preservation Board, I think it was, that we didn't have a virtual, we really not intentional, but we had a meeting without a virtual option. And I think Jana's office got a question about why there wasn't that ability. So Jana and I started talking about that, and that really brought up the really needing some direction from you all about kind of how you want to cover that in the future.
There's a Parks Board meeting this coming Tuesday, and I don't think there was an offer of a virtual option.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're consistent on that. So that's really kind of what I'm looking for.
It may have been there, and I just didn't notice that option because I was going in person, so I don't know.
And I'm not sure either.
Are we losing anything if a third of the board members are virtual?
Yes, potentially. Just
What are we losing?
commitment, involvement,
Connection?
connection.
Communication.
And this is, my question is also more for not necessarily the board members themselves to have virtual participation, but whether you want members of the public to be able to log in and watch a meeting without having to physically be there.
So could you require the board members to be present and make a viewing, not non-participation only type?
I think we could broadcast the board, broadcast them without doing like a Zoom where you would be viewing. So essentially, yes, just a view only, like you would
Yeah.
send it to YouTube
Yeah.
or something like that. So if you just wanted to watch what was going on, but you wouldn't have, in that instance, you wouldn't be able to offer public comments virtually if you did that.
So then the question is not, do we want to offer board members participation virtually?
That is part of the question. I just wanted to point out that there's another option there in terms of,
So we could limit it to board members only.
to come in person.
No.
Oh.
Virtual.
No. Because they're all public meetings.
So if it is on virtual, then anybody can watch.
Yes.
I do think there's merit to having in-person meetings if you're on the board. There's also some merit to have the ability for someone who is out of state, out of town, who is a board member, being able to participate through the virtual component and not miss the meeting. So, there's a trade-off there somewhat. But I do think it needs to be open for the public to watch and to listen.
Those that are quasi judicial, they're having a hearing, I feel like they need to have the board in front of them. That just feels right. And
In
if there's-
whatever manner, virtual or.
And if there's just, if it gets heated or those that are board members that are there virtually, they miss a lot of what's going on. They don't really understand the passion that, the citizen may be projecting. It just feels like the board members need to be in person.
As much as possible, but Wendell's Point is a good one. I mean, like Marty logged on to some board from the hospital bed,
Yeah.
and so they could have a quorum.
Right, and if there was an instance, for you, same thing,
I couldn't.
I realize it was different for you with
Hospital
your
bed.
medication. We didn't want you.
So what we could do is, ask board members to attend in person unless the chair of that board, kind of authorizes virtual participation kind of on a case-by-case basis. Kathy, would you be comfortable with that? That way, somebody, we still have, I think, people who prefer to participate virtually right now because of the pandemic. So, I would encourage at least having that option as we transition. But my question is both for the transition period, but really longer in terms of, are we at a place where, kind of on a permanent level, if you will, we are going to broadcast out advisory board meetings or not?
It's part of one of the
You can
initiatives.
broadcast out to the public. So
Sorry.
Yeah,
what you
that's
mean?
part of my question is, do you want to continue to offer like a Zoom option or for virtual participation for members of the public?
Alan, are you gonna jump out a window if we do that?
No, the actual committee, whoever heads up that committee, the staff member will actually run that Zoom meeting.
So it's not driving you and your staff nuts.
It's,
So we do that.
I'm sorry, but
No,
it's hard to put it back in the box after you've opened it up to the public and the ability to listen in and see what's going on. It's kind of like, okay, we've given you a taste of it, now we're not going to let you participate. I think it's kind of like going through the selection process of board members that we opened up a great deal. And this opens up what's happening within those boards for people who are interested. And I just hate to see us say, shut that down And if you're gonna go to a airport advisory board meeting, if you're already in the hospital, you couldn't participate, or you gotta drive all the way downtown to go to that 5 o'clock meeting. You know, sometimes the people just want to hear what's going on. So I hate to see us consider doing away with the virtual aspect of the advisory boards. Quasi judicial, there may be a few of those you maybe shouldn't, but you know, RZ, it might as well be open. It's a board like everybody else. So I just think, excuse me, we'd be going the wrong direction to do away with the virtual component.
And my recommendation actually would be the opposite, is that you strongly consider leaving the quasi judicial open to the public because, to virtual participation, because those boards are hearing and making final decisions in some cases. So the more access you have, I think helps. So if you were going to choose between one of those categories, my recommendation would be do the quasi judicial, but we can easily implement a scenario where we continue to offer virtual options for all boards and commissions. And that's just what I.
Back to Jessica's point about the quasi judicial, you would have some concern. That would be some additional discussion.
Yeah,
But I think
not
if
for,
we keep them all
for it to be open
open,
I think they should all be open, virtually.
Just for the board members to participate
well, okay.
in person.
That was my question.
Perfectly fine.
Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you.
I've talked to a lot of my peers across the state. Remember, agencies have adopted in the future, we're just going to continue offering in person and virtual. I think they're adopting that even after that.
For the members, for the commissioners.
The board members not being participate virtually.
Yeah, so Mayor's question is what type of legal requirements exist regarding virtual participation? So under the Texas Open Meetings Act, there are some very strict protocols that we have to follow in order for a board member to participate virtually in some boards. I don't think those things are apply to advisory only boards. So, but for you as a city council and some members of quasi judicial boards like P&Z, there are certain things that under the Texas Open Meetings Act, we would have to do. But for the board member or the commission member to participate. Right now, we're still in a situation where those, some of those requirements are waived. But I think and assuming they go back in place, I still think, especially with the direction that you gave today, where attendance by the board or commission member will be in person unless, arranged for a virtual option through the chair, then that way we can make sure that we follow any of those requirements.
At what point in time are you going to enact that? Because we just said we'd go virtual for a while because of the pandemic. Are you talking about a month from now, 2 months from now, or tomorrow after?
For board.
Or everyone having to be there in person if they're a member of.
That's up to you. One way to look at it would be to continue to allow the virtual participation for as long as the disaster declaration from the governor is in place, which allows the virtual participation under the Open Meetings Act. But again, that's permissive, not required. So you can, we could do that tomorrow. But again, I do think there are still some people that would.
Well, that would be that'd be a trigger for at least for us to review it again.
Anything else?
Yes, I have a question unrelated to this. Can I ask something?
Is it on the agenda?
No.
Then no.
Isn't that Roadrunners?
Why don't you just take it?
So just to reiterate the direction, we will continue to offer both virtual and in-person participation options for both board and commission members and members of the public at this time until such time as the governor lifts the disaster declaration. And then at that time, the idea would be to transition to board and commissioner participation in person unless pre-arranged with the chair and making sure staff has the opportunity to make sure we follow any of the requirements that exist in the Open Meetings Act. But we will continue to allow virtual participation options for members of the public.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, very good. It is now 4:25, and I'll now adjourn the workshop of the city council and convene in the meeting of the Temple City Council in the Jack Morris Board Ballroom.
Thank you.